far too often it seems that I go to the movies and am just horribly disappointed in some way. Not in the sense that I see a movie and it's bad, but more in the way that I feel almost cheated by the experience. To me, the activity of getting off my couch and going to my local theater is about much more than just the quality of the film. It's an event, one that you share with other people, and that experience can come in many different forms. A good comedy will have the crowd constantly laughing, an intense drama will have everyone on the edge of their seats, an event film like The Avengers will have the audience losing their minds every time something even remotely cool happens on screen, at least in America.
Oh shit!
Even bad movies have their place in theaters. In fact, my favorite theater experience ever was when my friends and I went to a showing of The Room, throwing spoons at the screen and yelling "Hi Denny" and making wisecracks. It was great. To me, something like that is what makes the theater experience something special. Though it can easily be tarnished by someone eating a burrito in my ear, or slurping up the last drop of soda, or vaping in my face, it's still something that I feel is worth chasing, because when it does hit just right, there is no better environment to experience a movie. Well, most movies. That's the other part of this. Good or bad, some films, straight up, are simply not meant for theaters. Especially nowadays with streaming, there is no need to watch every single thing in a theater. In fact, many films are better experienced at home and can even reach a larger audience by having that lower cost to entry. What I'm trying to get at is that my disappointment with some movies that I see in theaters is almost always due to them not justifying their need to be there in the first place. I already pay for things like Netflix and Hulu and Disney Plus and all the other ones, so when I see something in a theater that should be on one of those platforms instead, I feel like I've just wasted both my time and money. Bottom line, if you are going to release a film in a movie theater, it needs to be worth seeing in a movie theater. That may sound like a no-duh, but there are very few films that to me meet that criteria. There are, of course, a few filmmakers like Nolan and Tarantino and James Cameron that make movies with the theater experience in mind, but the rest of the field is kind of a crapshoot. For every Mad Max Fury Road and Nobody and Top Gun Maverick that comes out, there are a whole bunch of duds. However, there is one series of films that, for the last decade, have justified, nay demanded, the theater experience more than anything in recent memory. That franchise is, of course, John Wick.
Yeah.
A series of action films starring Keanu Reeves that, despite doing quite well at the box office, is still criminally underrated. These movies do not get nearly the praise they deserve for how well done they are. The sheer level of precision and camera work and stunts and world building is unmatched by any contemporary series of films. It is truly something to behold, and like I said, despite all the praise the movies get, it's still far less than what they deserve. So brace yourself, because I'm about to shamelessly gush over John Wick for however long this video goes. No cynicism, just an unbridled praise of perhaps the greatest action franchise in film history.
Yeah.
Like I always mention when I talk about this kind of stuff, the most important aspect to a franchise's success is the creative leadership and generally who is in charge of it. It's not just about having a good idea. Lots of people have good ideas for movies. It's about knowing how to execute that vision. The knowledge of not only knowing what will work best, but also, more importantly, knowing what won't work. The last thing you want from a group of filmmakers and writers is for them to be totally delusional as to what the property they have is. In my opinion, beyond just the obvious great filmmaking, this is by far the greatest strength of the John Wick franchise. Chad Stahelski and Keanu Reeves and everyone else that has any creative control of these movies possess one singular vision and executes that to its absolute maximum potential. It's a bunch of experienced action film veterans and stunt coordinators that get together and make one pure, focused action film. There are no illusions of high drama or super complex narratives. All of these people know their strengths and know exactly what they are doing. They also, and I know I beat this drum very often, but I gotta mention it every time, they also take every aspect of the movie seriously. Nothing is half-assed, and absolutely nothing is played for laughs or done ironically. We've all seen the videos of the cast and crew training for months prior to filming, so I won't go on too long about that, but it really is something to be admired. The amount of work and dedication to the craft that everyone in these movies shows is about as good as you can possibly hope for. The only comparable franchise around these days is Mission Impossible, but even those movies had to work out a few kinks before they really started to get good. I sincerely doubt any of you remember how mediocre and forgettable the first 3 films in that franchise were. Quite the far cry from what they are today. But right off the bat with the first John Wick, they already had their process down to a science. The long takes, the steady camera, the infrequent cuts, it's all been baked in from the beginning and only gets better with each installment. Even my fiance, who is not a big fan of action movies, was gushing about how good every shot of the 4th film looked and was talking about her favorite sequences. This is a woman, mind you, whose favorite movies are Moana and Encanto and usually cringes at the slightest whiff of action movie violence. I think that really speaks to how impressive everything done in these movies are. The action sequences are composed similar to how an intricate dance number in a musical would be done, with tons of people hitting their marks at the perfect moment and pulling off sometimes minutes worth of choreography in 1 or 2 takes. Stahelski never has to hide the action or use the camera to trick you because everything you see on screen is being performed for real by the real actors. That's how you get all the amazing uncut, steady shots that you see across the franchise. Sometimes I hear people say that other action films should be done the same way, and I would tend to agree for the most part, but I don't think people realize just how hard to pull off all of this is. Your average cast and crew in Hollywood can't do this. That's why you get embarrassing things like Liam Neeson hopping a fence with like 30 cuts, or Michael Bay having his fucking camera fly around in a constant circle. People try to do what John Wick does, but it's not as easy as it looks, which makes the franchise all the more special. The way Stahelski and Reeves understand how to execute an exciting action sequence is comparable to how Tarantino understands how to write dialogue, or the way Spielberg knows how to make a blockbuster, or how James Cameron knows how to make $1 billion. They're simply on a different level than the rest of the industry. John Wick was destined to succeed from the start because the right people at the top of their game are the ones making it. It's as simple as that. I think perhaps my favorite part of the John Wick movies are the style, which I think flies a little bit under the radar and isn't talked about as much. We all know that the films have a very precise action rhythm to them, but the way in which the action is framed is where I think the films are most unique. It's this marriage of hyper-realism and borderline comic book fantasy that really sells all of it. In the context of the universe the films take place in, John Wick is the biggest and baddest hitman assassin out there. The man can kill any number of people, no matter how many or how strong they are. This is the case for tons of action heroes, though admittedly John Wick leans a bit more into it than the average action movie. We see him accomplish impossible challenge after impossible challenge. For all intents and purposes, the man is basically a superhero. However, in the moments that he is actually doing all this stuff on screen, it's played about as straight and realistic as humanly possible. Sure, when you look at the scope of what he is doing, it's of course not at all realistic, but the moment-to-moment action is. He's doing very basic kung fu type moves and shooting guns how any trained individual would shoot guns. He takes constant cover, he reloads, he runs out of ammo very frequently. When he manages to shoot and down an enemy, he shoots them like 3 or 4 more times to make sure they are dead. No one's head explodes, he doesn't kick people across rooms. The hand-to-hand combat is usually just him smacking someone with whatever he has around him at the moment. There's no over-the-top Hollywood punch-in sound effects. People that get shot aren't turning into pools of blood. It's all very grounded and about as close to realistic as a movie like this can get. He doesn't even have a signature gun or weapon like most action heroes do. Sure, he often starts out with like a 9mm pistol or something like that, but like I said, he will quickly use up all the ammo and have to grab a different gun or weapon, because of course he does. These things don't have bottomless clips. He doesn't even look particularly cool when he's doing his thing because he's like hunched over or taking cover or just trying not to die. He also misses all the time because, again, of course he would. So you have this hyper-realistic action style applied to a character that simultaneously exists in one of the most heightened fantasy action universes there is, and it somehow blends together perfectly. The grounded action style actually allows the movies to have that over-the-top criminal underworld element with all these silly aspects and rules because the action is so restrained. Like, could you imagine how different these movies would feel if they were exactly the same, but instead of the action being executed in a restrained, semi-realistic way, John Wick was doing like ninja flips or Fast and Furious level stupid stunts or never reloading or any of that? It would come off like the dumbest thing you have ever seen and would not have nearly the same amount of love, no matter how cool the world they build is. It's the style that sells everything and keeps the audience on board. They also manage to continually up the ante each movie while never going too far. The fourth movie gets a bit close to the edge with how many times John Wick survives getting hit by a car and like falling out of a 3-story building. It's a bit much, but compared to other action films, that's nothing. I mean, just look how nuts the Fast and Furious movies have gotten since the first film. They crossed the falling out of a building and surviving threshold like 6 films ago.
We're in outer space! Told you numbers don't lie.
In short, the action doesn't just look and feel great, it also keeps the films on the rails, which, for an action franchise 4 movies deep to still be relatively on the rails, is a pretty rare thing. You gotta appreciate that amount of restraint. So while the action keeps the movies grounded, the area that the creators allow themselves to go nuts in is the ever-expanding lore of the John Wick universe. John Wick is a retired fixer, hitman, assassin, whatever term you want to use guy, and he comes out of retirement to kill a group of mafia-type guys that wronged him. You get a little nugget of world building with the Continental Hotel and the rules about no business being done there, but that's about it. They had no idea that the franchise would even be a franchise, so the story is intentionally very simple. It's mostly just a vehicle to show off their action chops, but when we get to the sequels, that's where the world totally opens up. Not only is John Wick a badass, now there are all kinds of other famous assassins like him and different crime families that all have this secret high table together. There are very strict rules that are followed by everyone in this criminal underworld. There is a structure and an order to everything, and everyone pretty much knows each other. All of this world building serves 2 purposes. First, and most obvious, it's just a lot of fun to learn new things about the way things work in this universe. It gives the movies their own unique setting to work with. Most franchises do this to some extent or another. In order to justify sequels even being made, the world naturally has to expand to fit more in it. You either do that, or just do the same exact thing again. So each new movie, the writers can come in and add a new fun element to the films that makes it that much more enjoyable, which is all fine and good and is to be expected from any good franchise, but what it really does well in John Wick is further reinforce how much of a badass John Wick himself is, by consistently displaying how strong and organized and resourceful the table is, and having John continue to prevail over them builds his legend even more. We go from John fighting one gang in New York in the first movie to fighting a bunch of other assassins and a member of the High Table in the second, to him fighting a litany of other trained killers in the third movie, to him fighting the entire High Table in the fourth. The more the films show how strong the criminal underbelly is and how organized they are, the more they show how strong John is, because he can and does kill everything put in his way, without explicitly saying anything aside from the famous Baba Yaga speech in the first film. We know that no matter who John is fighting, he is always the most powerful player on the board. That steady ramp up of stakes and threat level allows the movies to get as crazy as they do. It wouldn't make sense for most of the action scenes that happen in the fourth film to happen in the first because we wouldn't believe it, but by the time we get to the fourth movie, it all makes perfect sense. There's no thought of the cops being called or some kind of authority getting involved because it's basically been implied that this criminal underworld abides by their own rules outside of the rest of society. Everyone else in the world just kind of ignores them and lets them sort their own stuff out. Again, without saying a single expository line of dialogue. The more it expands, the more each film makes sense, both current and in retrospect. Now we come to the beating heart of the John Wick films, Keanu Reeves, a man beloved by the internet and is by all accounts a great guy. Everyone is familiar with the level of work and dedication he puts into his films, so I won't belabor that point. We've all seen the videos of him doing the John Wick training. It's impressive, it's great, we all know this. What I want to talk about is how these movies utilize his limited range as well as any movie ever has. Now, to be clear, I like Keanu Reeves. The Matrix, Point Break, Speed, Bill and Ted, they're all up there with my favorite films, but let's be honest, the man is not a particularly good actor, at least not in the traditional sense.
I've seen many strange things already. Bloody wolves chasing me through some blue inferno.
There is no universe out there in which he is in that upper crust of actors like Gary Oldman or Daniel Day-Lewis and actively competes for awards. It doesn't exist. He's more in that tier of people like Arnold or Tom Cruise or The Rock where they have charisma and the right look and just enough talent and charm to get by, but aren't ever going to knock your socks off with their acting chops. However, what all these people have in common is that they know that about themselves. They are all fully aware of their limited range in what they are good at, which for them is mostly action-heavy roles with minimal dialogue or at least not particularly difficult dialogue. In many ways, they are better described as stuntmen who have charisma. I don't think that's a negative thing, to be clear. Not all acting is about monologuing or crying or yelling or being dramatic. Every role calls for a different set of skills, and the John Wick films call for that kind of actor. You need someone like Reeves who is experienced and willing to put in the time to properly execute all the things the movies want to do. It's a very difficult physical part to play. Is it going to take home next year's Oscar? No, of course not. But that doesn't mean it's not just as impressive as the kind of usual stuff that does win awards. Make no mistake, Keanu Reeves is great at what he does. Now again, dialogue is not exactly his strong suit, but all of these movies cleverly work around his limited acting capabilities by 1, simply having him not talk a lot, and 2, hiring properly trained quality actors to put around him that do most of the talking for him. You get people like Ian McShane and Lawrence Fishburne and Willem Dafoe and Halle Berry to come in and basically do all the talking. Most of Keanu's scenes of dialogue will be him posing some kind of question and then someone like Ian McShane will answer him for like 20 to 30 seconds and then Keanu will say yeah or I need a gun or maybe ask another simple question and it goes from there. You are still getting the same information out of these scenes that you would in any other movie, but instead of both actors talking equally, they just tip the scales away from Keanu. I will admit, sometimes it comes off a bit clunky, like in the 4th film where he's acting opposite Donnie Yen, who is also not exactly a trained thespian, but these scenes never go on for too long. They know just how far they can push it. Again, Stahelski and Reeves know exactly what their strengths are and what to focus on. So to wrap things up, I want to talk about John Wick 4 and the likely end of the series. Despite being a huge fan of the previous films, I didn't really go into the 4th one with super high expectations. Not because I thought it would be bad, but I just assumed that I had seen all this franchise had to offer. I mean, how many franchises 4 movies deep do something truly groundbreaking? Not many, but John Wick is one of those special few. Not only is John Wick 4 the best installment in the series in my opinion, but if this is truly the end, it is going out better than any franchise like this ever has. I mean, the balls of this movie to push the 3-hour mark alone is something to be commended. Pure genre films like this usually can't reach that length simply because the filmmakers only have X amount of action scenes or musical numbers or horror sequences up their sleeve, and if they do reach that length, it's usually due to padding. But nothing in this movie feels like filler or padding. It's as long as it is because the vision of the filmmaker was that grand scale. It doesn't feel that long either. I've seen some people complain that it's a bit bloated, but I just don't agree. Everything in the movie moves the plot forward and it never gets dull. If anything, I wanted more out of the film, which is such a great feeling to leave the audience with at the end of a series. It's not ending due to diminishing returns or lack of ideas, it's ending because it just reached its natural conclusion. Even though I would of course love to see more John Wick, I really do hope that this is the last one because it puts a perfect bow on it. John Wick is a fully realized and completed vision by an extremely talented group of artists that are closing the book at the top of their games. And as a fan of the franchise, I couldn't ask for anything more than that.
Yeah.